name's Laiba.
Okay, and do you think that women in society should possess absolute equality or equity?
Equity.
Why?
Because men and women aren't born equal. They have different physical attributes and they have different systems. And I believe that I believe like women can do what men can do, but sometimes it's not as effective. Though they can reach to that potential if they, push themselves. It's like we kind of were born different. We were built different.
We are not yet close to equality. Of course, like we're going there, but our society it's not ready yet to give the opportunity for women to be to have like the same chance, to have like the same job opportunity or the same recognition from boss or like in the society in general. So that would be my answer.
So do you believe that at our current state, or women should possess equity between their male counterparts? That they should have equity with males instead of equality, or equality over equity?
Equity.
Equity?
Yeah.
Why so?
Because equality, even if like you are like, for example, if you say, oh, a man and then a woman have the same rights, in society it's not how it works. Even like we have the same right, we don't have like the same chance. If it's equity, then it's become balance, exactly.
I mean, for the most part, it's kind of a blended thing, because equality and equity can kind of overlap.
So what do you lean more towards? Do you find a balance between both equality and equity, or do you lean more towards one side?
Well, it's tough to say. I mean, it depends on what you're talking about. I mean, if you're talking about certain specific I don't know, professions, like let's say like concrete work and bricklayers. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, you won't find too many women in those spaces because it's just not really something that they prefer. And probably because there's specific genetic components that would allow men to have specific strengths in those areas that would lean them more towards that inclination. And in societies that have like more equal opportunity choices, people tend to gravitate away from those things, whereas we try to blend them across different things to push the ideas of equality here. But I think that, I mean, if people want to choose to do specific things, they should have the right to be able to do them. But I think that, taking into consideration trying to make people do things, to have rights only based on what, you've pigeonholed into opportunity or pigeonholed into the idea of what that means for each gender specifically is a mistake. Because there's some big, tough women out there who
Yeah,
wanna
for
do
sure,
whatever
for
they
sure.
wanna do.
Equality, not totally equality, but equity, yes. Because according to the definition of equality is that, for example, which is something very simple, if someone is going and ordering food, right? And there is a female and there is a male and both have the same age, well, the female tends to eat less than the man. So in spite that, okay, both of them are getting food, right? Equality here does not apply, but equity, right? Based on what amount they could eat. So there are many factors related to that. So that's why I feel it's not about equality, it's about equity, right? We are equal in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's a totally different story. Is that when on Judgment Day, Allah will not come and say, oh, you're a woman, I'm going to put you aside, you're a man, oh, come forward, right? Everyone will be judged on their sin with the same balance, right?
So this question is very interesting because it begs the question, you have to understand the definition of both words. Equity is a little less defined, but equality is more less like concrete, the definition. But equality is more concrete in that equality means that every party, every person or within like a transaction gets the same amount. So if you have a group of people, both groups of people, no matter what their circumstances are, would get the exact same amount as the other group of people. Now, equity might be something different. Most people say it's ambiguous what equity really means, but personally, I believe that equity means that a person gets what they need, and the amount that they get changes depending on their circumstances. So, for example, someone who is short, who needs, who wants to look over, who wants to look over the crowd, might be given a footstool, whereas someone who's already tall might not be given a footstool because they don't need it. So that would be, in my opinion, the definition of equity. Now, with these definitions, I would come to the conclusion that if you believe that women are exactly identical to men in which they have the same circumstances as men, then that's when you would think that equality is necessary for women today. In my opinion, I honestly think that women and men have their own differences socially, physically, whatever. They are different. I recognize that. And therefore, I am opted to say that women require equity in this day and age, not equality.
In my opinion, as a female myself, I think that given that we are two separate genders, we will never really find a balance in equality. So in that case, I think equity is the most reasonable thing in society for women and men to live in society together. We do have different biological makeup, so obviously women are able to reproduce and have children, and men obviously are built physically different, as well as their neurological their neurological makeup is also different. So I think in a simple answer, I think equity is the most reasonable thing in a society. And when it comes to laws and the law system and the justice system, I think that there's a universal set of laws that there should be set for all human beings. And it's not necessarily a gender basis, like something that needs to be equitable. It needs to be something that is just set out across the board. And I think that it's something that like all humans need to abide by, or all people in a society need to abide by, not necessarily because of their gender, but because of that is just the universal right thing to do. The modern feminist waves, we see a lot of products of anti-men, and we see a lot of product of like this wave of like, we don't need men in society, we don't need men to play these roles.
Sure, I think both of those options are completely viable when we look at the woman. I feel as if the structure of the way that we kind of look at society and the questions that we ask in relation to society itself is based on the things that we see. So it's all about perception for the most part. When we look at our fellow human being, we see a man or woman, black or white, Hispanic, not Hispanic, South Asian, not South Asian. But we often forget, like, at our fundamental core, we are human beings first and foremost. And all the rights that we should have or ought to have should be based on that fact, as opposed to any gender or any other social parameter with which we kind of look at things. From what I understand and from my reading on the subject, there's a lot of, not controversy, but there's a lot of discussion within the feminist community, and there seems to be no real clear-cut direction as far as women looking at each other as women and then going forward in that regard. There's a lot of small contention within the community that kind of, what's the word? It kind of undermines the process that they're trying to get through. So whether or not it's a issue of equity or equality, I don't think that it has been determined yet. If we look at the suffrage movement from the 20s and 30s, women were fighting for the right to be recognized as human beings, fundamentally, right? It's a very, I don't want to say basic, but it's a very foundational groundwork level of like, hey, acknowledge us that we exist and that we are equal to you. And now let's move forward from that. And I think as we move forward, we're getting into more abstract ideas, not necessarily grounded in this fundamental, well, they are grounded in the fundamental thinking, but they're a bit more abstract in nature. Things like get equal pay, things like the sexualization of women, how do we get away from that?
Well, I mean, I feel like everyone should have equality of opportunity. That's what the initial movement was for. But things have changed a lot now in our priorities. Like, feminists, their priorities have gotten very askew. So we do have equal opportunity in the business places and everything, really. We're able to do a lot more than we were before, if not everything. More so, we're focusing on equality of outcome, which is just not fair. Like, for example, the Trudeau government and their 50-50 thing. It's technically not fair to the men that actually deserved it and worked towards it. So that's what I mean. It's we're trying to bubble wrap the world in a way for women.
Yeah.
I believe the ratio between men and women was 75 and 25 before. And when he came into parliament, it became a 50-50 thing. Which means that 25 males lost their job, 25 females got a job solely not for the purpose of how well they perform, but solely because of their gender and how everything should be equal.
Okay, in my opinion, it's more reasonable for them to have equity. Because so what women do right now, they preach for equality, most of them actually. But when it comes, but like based on the scenario they're in or the situation they're in, they choose one or the other. So one example of that could be if, let's say, they're like the payout from a job, their salary, right? Women get less than men. In that case, they want equality because they want the same amount of money as men do. And I guess, and like that's a fair argument. It's true. But let's say they get into a fight, right? They get into a fight with a guy, they punch, kick the guy. Nobody says anything, right? Nobody raises an eyebrow. But if it's a guy doing the same thing, they're going to be like, no, that guy's in the wrong, what's it called? That guy is in the wrong, I guess you could say. Like he's the guy, he's wrong for punching her back or kicking her back, even though she started it. In that case, the girls would say they'd rather have equity. So it's like a scenario thing.
So I personally believe that over the two, I believe that equity is more important, because when it comes to equity by definition means that, everyone has what they need according to their needs, as opposed to equality. Equality, in my opinion, nowadays just focuses on both genders being the same thing without focusing much on what exactly both gender needs. For example, in tennis, I play tennis, so I'll give that, example. In tennis, like professionally, males play 5-setter games, which is often 2 to 3 hours, whereas women play only 3-setters, even in like major Grand Slam tournaments. But women expect to be paid the same, even though they're playing less tennis. So personally, I believe that it doesn't matter. Like, I believe that men do deserve to be paid more if they're playing, doing more work. But when it comes to equality, in the sense that I believe that there should be equality present for all, in the basis of being a human being.
1. Our interviewees gave crucial and vital perspectives and opinions. However, most of them leaned towards equity instead of equality. An aspect I found interesting was that although most people chose equity, nearly half of the women interviewed believed that they deserved more of an absolute equality stance in society. An interviewee had mentioned that in order to reach equity, equality must be enforced. Another commonality that was observed was the explanation of those that chose equity. They said that men and women have different characteristics, whether physical, emotional, psychological, etc. Choosing equity emphasizes their belief that people should be assessed based on their abilities, capabilities, and attributes. Thus, my perspective was reinforced. Moving on, I noticed another trend while interviewing. People's faith, culture, and upbringing played an integral role in their answers. For example, many of the Muslim peers that I interviewed mentioned how their religion and heritage implement certain rules and principles. Thus, many believed that based on the diversity of humans and their faith, equity would serve to do more justice. In the end, I found these points to be quite surprising but also expected. Question 2. The responses received are a result of how society has shaped the social construct over time. Due to the long-lasting effects of patriarchy, women have decided to stand up for themselves and for their rights only recently. We see how the suffragist movement and the perseverance of women entering the workforce, demanding rights, fighting for basic needs, has caused a wave on how men perceive the social construct of women. To add on, the incorporation of women in society as a person without being objectified has allowed them to grow and help humans in many different ways. Women were able to break free from the restrictions applied by men and were able to grant the women of this generation and future generations more peace and more rights. Question 3. In conclusion, we can use the responses we received from our interviews and push for an agenda that possesses equity in relation to the case between the genders. A society that refers to equity would result in less clashes and conflicts, as people will begin to be scaled on a level which will be balanced based on their identities and attributes. However, equality is not something to be overlooked. Going off of the data amassed, equality would be essential in getting the equity that humans deserve. Another point that should be added was that we need to help build the foundational rights for women in regions where they have not yet received it. In addition to this, we should look to the religious and cultural background, some of the most imperative factors that alter the way a person thinks and believes. That way, we can assure ourselves that the equity that should and would be provided will be to the best of our abilities.
Throughout the span of the interviews, a common pattern was revealed. The majority of people were inclined to choose equity over equality with the presupposition that fundamental human rights and essential equality exists. It was quite striking that most females were inclined to choose equity as it provided a strong consideration for the rights and needs of women. This was supported by the overwhelming rationale that men and women had biological, psychological, and social differences. It was also quite surprising that females suggested that they already possessed an equalized position with men in society. However, prior to this, I thought that all women had felt underprivileged in society. Moreover, although the current feminist movement endorses absolute equality as its core premise, many females condemn the movement's bias and irrational sentiments. Finally, I found that the statement from one female interview in particular to be quite intriguing. She said that although women have the same rights in society, they don't have the same chance. This poses the question, is this disparity in chance a result of a systemic scheme or an ingrained bias within society? Moving on. The idea of an egalitarian relationship between men and women in society is a social construct which has been developed over centuries. As women transitioned into social, political, and economic spheres, the development of this social construct became very much prominent. The interviews gave me insight about the formation of gender-based social construction. It is one based solely on human perception and the social parameters we use to interpret ideas in society. In this discourse, the objective of the suffrage movement was discussed in relation to the modern feminism movement. As both were cross-analyzed, the interviewees concluded that the suffrage movement established the groundwork for basic gender equality, whilst the modern feminist movement branched off into abstract ideas. Conclusively, from observing our responses, we can come to the conclusion that for both female and male parties, an equitable relationship in political, social, and economic affairs tends to be preferred. However, this can only be established when the ground level of basic human rights and equal opportunity is present. Therefore, the most idealistic stance, according to our qualitative data, is that equity must be established between the two sexes so long that the framework of basic human rights and equal gender opportunity exists. Through adopting an equitable relationship, men and women would be equalized not in a literal sense, but rather with a strong compensation for their overwhelming disparities.